An interview with Melanie, the founder of the Wildflower Cafe, 2023. Here's the restaurant in 1987. And here's Melanie standing in the construction of the restaurant, 1987. And here she is with Doug standing here. He did a lot of work with her. And here it is now, 2023. And here's Melanie. I'm sitting here with Melanie Patrick. This is Sean Powers, and this is a part of a series of films I'm doing about local people doing local things. And Melanie Patrick is a very local person. She was the person that started the Wildflower Cafe in 1987. 1987. And I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm actually interviewing all the owners. There's been 4 owners over the years of this restaurant, and I worked there as a dishwasher for 20 years off and on through the 4 owners. And so I myself have personally seen the transitions that this place has gone through. And it's pretty amazing that it's even there after how many years?
It's close to 40. It's getting
40 years of a vegetarian restaurant, and pretty amazing. I think it's amazing in itself in that
35.
It's maintained the name, and it's maintained the classiness of it, and the vegetarian cuisine is very important. And my first question for you is, who are you?
Well, let's see. I'm, I think, a mother first.
Mm-hmm.
And the restaurant, in a lot of ways, is dedicated to my daughter. It was a way to make a living in Humboldt County, give back to the community, take care of my daughter, be in a place that I loved. So I'm someone that loves Humboldt County, loves this place, fell in love with it when I was 13, and have tried to make my way making a living and taking care of my daughter and my community.
And working for yourself.
And working for myself, yep.
Now, you had a business before you had the Wildflower, and what was that?
The 18th Street Bakery was, in some ways, a gift from Matthew Schmidt from the Tofu Shop. He basically gave me all this equipment because he needed someone to do specialty baking for him. So I had a little tiny baby and had all this equipment, and I'd worked in a number of bakeries through the Bay Area. So I just started special orders for people, and it kept growing. So by 1987, I could expand it and decided to expand it into retail, to go from wholesale to retail. And it worked really well. That was the basis of the Wildflower.
Meaning you had an open storefront for people to come in and out.
Well, I knew all the bills were paid from what we called the back door. The back door wholesale orders covered all the costs. So retail was interacting for the first time with the public, finding out what people wanted, what they thought of new products. It was really fun to get feedback from real people instead of just doing wholesale orders, which I'd specialized in. It had done really, really well, wholesale only.
So you knew that part of the business. And then the part of the business that you didn't know about, which was?
People coming in off the street. And I got to learn a lot more. We had boxes, I think for 6 months, little comment boxes for everybody at every table. And I made it my mission to find out what people wanted. It's like, what are you missing in Arcata? What do you want to see on the menu? What do you miss? What are you looking for? So we could slowly build up a repertoire of things that people wanted and kept coming back for.
Right. And I remember one of your mission statements was to have something that was affordable.
Yeah, we always had something on the menu. You remember rice and bean bowls?
Yeah, and pancakes.
Yeah, there's always something affordable. You know, back in the day, it was probably the $3 bowl. So, you know, you could always get something that was vegetarian, you know, well-made, healthy for you, and cheap. You know, it wasn't going to be something high-end or fancy omelets or something that's prepared to order, but, you know, simple, absolutely, you know. So anybody should be able to walk in and find something to eat.
Right. At And you would open up at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, we did 8 to 8 for years.
Right, which was pretty important because everybody has different schedules, and I'm sure some people were like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you opened at 8."
Yeah, a lot of people, the location being right next to, I'm going to still say Humboldt State back in the day, they'd stop in and have stuff as they walked up the bridge to school, to the university.
Right, University of Humboldt.
So we always had a lot of people come in, and especially because they knew, for me it was important to bring the bakery back. That had been, I think could it be Schumann? Anyway, there was a bakery there for a long time. We've talked about that, Sean.
Yeah.
It was really, for me, I thought it was really magical to bring the bakery back. It went transitions from Northtown Books to all kinds of businesses, but the old stain on the floor was where the original mixer was, and I put the new mixer right on top of it. It's like, okay, we're bringing back the energy from this old bakery and opening at 8 a.m. to provide fresh cinnamon rolls, fresh scones, croissants, anything people wanted as they had their coffee as they went up the hill to do whatever they were doing at the university.
And it gave people an opportunity to eat vegetarian food, maybe for the first time.
Right. I tried to demystify it. I went to school at UC Berkeley and was part of that community, and I swear a lot of the restaurants down there drove me crazy. Like you're supposed to be you're supposed to suffer when you eat vegetarian. I mean, flavorless food, bland rice, no seasoning. I mean, and beans that were like that gave you indigestion. It's like, oh my God, this is horrible food. I would never eat vegetarian if I had to eat food like that.
Right.
But to me, it was like well prepared, simple, sustainable food. I mean, it's the answer for, healing the planet and keeping people healthier. So for me, it was a really fun thing to do, to interact on that level with retail people, that you could educate how good it is. People, for the first time, that could eat eggplant and it's as good as lasagna with tons of beef in it.
Right. And sometimes people wouldn't even know the difference.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
like,
like,
wow,
just try our lasagna. You won't miss the meat, honest to God.
Yeah, I know some people are like, oh, I love meat. It's like you give them something with like tempeh in it or tofu or mushrooms, and they're like, oh, wow, this is really good chicken soup. And it's like, there's no chicken in there.
Exactly.
Now, my series of questions all have WH in them. The who, what, where, why, when, and whatever. And so that's the format that I'm following. So my other who question is, who influenced you?
Oh, that's fun. Oh, lots of people. My mom was fun. One of the things we did, I think of it more at Christmas, but she would put 4 bowls around the table, because there's 4 of us, and put all the ingredients on the middle of the table, and we each would mix a batch of cookie dough to make Christmas cookies with our hands,
Right.
And it was really fun. And then we'd get all the cookie cutters and cookie presses out, so that was pretty fun. My dad was the wacky one. He would put cornflakes in the pancakes and other weird things you didn't even know what they were. My gram taught me everything else, eating right out of the garden. And a lot of canning with her, but eating simple, eating right out of the garden. And then traveling around the world, traveling places where people eat directly from the garden.
Right, so all that played out in the restaurant because local growers would come in and bring in bags of carrots and this and that, and it was all local.
Yeah, I think I was the first one that did that deal. I think might have been Grady Walker, but I would talk to people down at Farmers Market, and a lot of that food got taken home, sometimes canned, sometimes dumped, sometimes fed to animals or composted. And I basically made a deal that if they stopped on at the cafe after the farmer's market, I would buy everything on the truck.
Oh.
So what would happen is they knew they could sell it, and they would sell it at a discount to me. But it could be, half a box of fresh basil. So James and I would go crazy making pesto for the next 2 days.
Right.
And that would carry through, as much as we had in the freezer till it was gone. And then everything else got turned into the daily soup. But it was wonderful because we had outstanding organic food, you just make something wonderful out of it.
Right. And James was my friend, and that's how I got my job there, was because we worked together in a restaurant in Sacramento called Mums, and it was started by this woman named Julie, who started this place called Julie's Kitchen, which made falafels. And then she expanded into getting this other restaurant, which was really a famous place. And then James moved away. He moved up to Humboldt County. And a year later or so, I moved up. And one of the reasons I moved up was he said, "Oh, I can get you a job probably at the restaurant." And I worked as a dishwasher and at Mum's, and he was a cook. And he started off as a prep cook. And then when I showed up in Arcata, I remember going into the restaurant and asking you for work, and you're like, I really can't hire you right now, but maybe you can come in and clean out the ovens once a week, and eventually you get your foot in the door. And that's basically what happened. That's how I got hired there. And I stayed as a dishwasher because I didn't really like some of the stress that I saw some of the people were going through, like the cooks and the waitresses, and the dishwasher was very low stress, and I was all about low stress. And so I'm really glad that you saw my potential as a great dishwasher. And I did it for 20 years there, and I had many opportunities to move up the ladder, but I was like, well, I like being on the ground level because no one's going to bug me really, maybe a greasy spoon here and there or whatever, but beyond that. So another WH question is, what gave you the idea that you can even do this? And I think you answered it about the bakery, but
yeah, there's a lot of reasons why. I want to add to your story though. I hired James on his birthday. I didn't realize that. But he finally showed me his driver's license when I hired him and did the paperwork, and I started cracking up. He says, yeah, it was a good birthday present. And you did more than dishwashing. One of the hardest things about running a restaurant is deep cleaning. And oh my God, Sean, it's like when you have to take the whole place apart and clean the hoods and the ovens and the refrigerators and take everything apart and scrub it. I mean,
yeah,
very few people can even handle that deep work, and you did that with me and you, and sometimes Brian would show up.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is dirty work.
That is really dirty work. Once a year when the place is closed for 2 weeks.
It was kind of like, ugh.
Exactly. Yeah, but you get on gloves and you just go behind the oven and above the oven, and sometimes things would have to be painted, but.
And another wet question is, what was the process that you took? Because a restaurant works on a crew. Besides the food that's coming in and going out, a restaurant works on a crew. What was your process for hiring your crew?
Oh, we've talked about that. That was really fun. Well, after selling the restaurant to Connie and all that, I really wanted to help other people run businesses. And one of the things I tell other owners is owners often hire employees for what makes them comfortable. I didn't. I always hired for my weaknesses. And I think we talked about Susie, who's like Southern hospitality queen. I mean, she's incredible. I love you, Susie. She's down in New Orleans doing that at Snug Harbor. Mm-hmm. And a pecan pie queen now. She makes pecan pies. But finding people that can do things better than you can, mm-hmm. And she had front of the house. I had back of the house. I could do strategy and finances and a lot of the HR management. I also hired people based on, we joked about it, but astrology. It's like, God, we got too much fire in the kitchen. We need somebody really mellow with a water sign, just calm things down and connect to people. So we played that game sometimes. Just kind of filling in the gaps where maybe, the team's getting too high strung with, all their other interests. We need someone that's just a mediator and accommodator that can fill in the gaps. So yeah, I definitely worked with looking for what would work for the whole crew.
It's pretty important.
It's really important. You get too many people that are the same and they start butting heads.
That's the one thing I noticed about the restaurant over those years was everybody pretty much got along. Every once in a while there'd be someone that was that would be, not get along and not flow. Yeah. You'd hire somebody, I remember there's one guy, he was a cook. I don't know if it was when you were working, but he brought in some ham one day. he was making soup and he thought he'd spice up the soup with. And I think James caught him like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I brought some ham in." He's like, "No, no, no, no. This is a vegetarian restaurant. Like, where are you coming from, man?" And that was pretty funny, you know. And I do remember a lot of people. I remember everybody getting along, but every once in a while there would be somebody that wouldn't get along, and it was obvious, and they had to move on and move forward.
Yeah.
And what would happen if that happened with you?
When someone didn't get along?
Yeah, like what would you do?
I think I was pretty clear, Sean. We had agreements when people were hired. I had the rule of three. You know, the first warning. You know, we would say, this is a team. You have to take care of the whole team. So if you're going to be more than 10 minutes late, you got to call us, because it's going to change everybody else in the team that's waiting for you. So they would get a first warning for being late or not showing up or whatever. And then I would say the second warning, on your final warning, you're out the door. It means you don't care about the team. You don't really want to be here. And now it's my job to help you move on to the next thing. And I would do it with a smile. It's like, this is what you're asking me to do. I'm asking you to leave because you're asking me to do it. I've been very clear. 3 warnings is it. I can't handle people that are that unreliable. It's unfair to me, and it's unfair to the entire team. Because someone's going to have to stretch to cover your unconscious behavior or your unkindness. Both.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the who and the what.
Mm-hmm.
And my next one is where. And I'm kind of baffled where to go with this question, because I realized that I didn't really have a route with this where. My where was, where did you gain experience in doing such a thing? But I think you've already told me that.
Well, I could add a story. I've been downsizing and cleaning the house, and I found my very, very first business card, and it was when I had moved to Berkeley, and this is early 70s, and there's Renaissance fairs and all these really cool events. And people had started coming to the Berkeley house all the time because I was always baking. So I taught myself to bake, and I would take baskets of fresh blueberry muffins or some kind of lovely stuff in a big basket and just walk through these Renaissance fairs until the basket was empty.
So that's where you started.
So I kind of started way back in the day in Berkeley, and a bunch of us had a lot of fun baking together. And then I had my first job, and I had barely turned 18. I helped open a restaurant called the Cheshire Cat, and it was up in Northtown, Berkeley, on the other side of the university. That was my first baking job, where I did all the bread for them. So I'd been baking since I was 17.
So that's where you got the experience.
The experience was running those places. And after Cheshire Cat kind of took off and did pretty well, I wanted to bake more, not just cook. So I ended up opening another place, helping someone that was running a cheese shop, and they wanted to do a baking shop above it. So I helped run a place called Say Cheese on Solano Avenue in Berkeley, and that was really fun. You know, at 4 a.m. I'd go down and do all the bread. So imagine walking into an international cheese shop. I learned more about cheese and wine in that shop than anywhere I've been since. It was a beautiful cheese shop. Every kind that you could imagine, you know, high-end, Albany, Berkeley, all these rich people up there that could afford cheese that was outrageously expensive. But I ran the bakery there. And then restaurant work. From then on out, it was all running restaurants. And there's a bartending stint for a while. But yeah, restaurant. So by the time I landed here with my daughter, it was like, well, I've done this. When Matthew gave me all that equipment, I've been doing it forever. Why not?
Yeah, Matthew Schmidt has been running the tofu shop for even longer than 40 years too, and he's still in business.
Yeah, he is. He's done really, really well.
And he looks great.
Yeah, he's done really well. He was very patient. I got to say, I have some really fun memories of Sienna, because he would have, you know, colanders that were almost 3 feet across, draining the tofu. and she's still in diapers tearing around the place, and she would find the tofu, and he'd find these little tiny hand grabs of her little tiny hands grabbing the fresh tofu out of his colander. And went, oops, you left the door open, sorry, Matthew. But it's fun. We shared a lot of space and had good memories, good energy. He really wanted me there and opened the door and gave me the equipment to do it, so I did it.
So that's who, what, and you answered the where.
Mm-hmm.
And the next W, why, is why. And my why question is, why did you decide to step away from the business?
Yeah, that's, 18 years of running the business. The wholesale gave me a little more freedom to be a mom because I could do all the baking, say in 3 days, and then have 4 days off to take trips with her or to do whatever it was that we wanted to do with a larger extended family. But once I got into the retail, it was more problematic, and it was harder to get away. The one time I did take my daughter, if you remember the trip that we took, we went to Europe, and it was a blast. But when I came back, Susie basically, don't ever do that again. That was horrible. I don't want your job. I'll stick to the front of the house, because it's a lot, the bank deposits and doing all the different steps that had to be done on a timeline. So I realized I couldn't have the freedom I needed. I had just finished an MBA. I was trying to figure out how to make more money to support my daughter in college. So I figured the best thing for me would be to find someone that wanted to continue to run it. And bless her heart, Connie Pena wanted to do it. She had all the experience. She was completely integrated in the business. She was a huge part of it. And she wanted to continue the tradition, and she did great. Yeah.
She did.
Yep.
And that answers my why.
Uh-huh.
Now on to the path of when. And again, I think you answered some of my when questions in the first questions. But my question was, when was it time for you to move on, you felt?
When I needed more freedom to travel, and I needed to make more money. A restaurant, especially a restaurant like the Wildflower, is a huge service to the community. There's many times I paid all you guys and didn't pay myself.
Mm-hmm.
As you're growing the business, you have to do that. And every time you invest in equipment, it was less money for me, more for the future, but, it's not like I could count on an income. And there were health benefits and package benefits that I wanted a regular high-paying job after doing my MBA, and I went to Silicon Valley to earn money to keep my daughter in college. So it was a choice to leave the community for a while and make enough money to support my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
That was the why.
And the when was just answered.
1998, yeah.
So you went from 87 to 98.
Yep.
And then you sold it to Connie, who was a worker there.
Forever. I'd have to look back. Connie might remember more than me. At least 10 years. And I think we started the transition in 97, if I remember right. But yeah, it was a pretty natural fit for her. And it seemed like she didn't debate about it that long. I made the decision to put it up for sale. I was talking about listing it because I knew when my daughter was leaving for college, and I was thinking, well, I could leave the area about the same time to earn more money, a regular income that I could count on with good health benefits and all the other things that I needed at that point in my life. Corporate job kind of thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Move away from beautiful Arcata
yeah.
into a place that you had been before because you grew up in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I knew I could do it. I knew that, I didn't like it much, but I knew I could do it.
Yeah. And so this is another WH question, but the W is in a different spot in the formation of the W. And it is how, HOW. And how was the transition taken on from you leaving the business to Connie taking over the business?
I think it went pretty well. There weren't a lot of things that she had to learn. There was some payroll logistics, but I think she kept the same bookkeeper that helped do a lot of that. I think it went pretty well. Originally, she bought with Eric, and that dissolved over the years. I carried a note for him. As far as I'm concerned, the transition was pretty seamless. I left the area, but I was still available.
Would she call you every once in a while and be like, "Hey, this came up," and no?
Really. There's some confusion at one point over which licenses transferred, but I think we worked that out. When you transfer owners, you have to reestablish certain licenses with the city and the county. But yeah, that's very small. Looking at it's not like it was an out of the area buyer. That transition would have been really difficult to explain the relationships between all the people that provided different things and agreements that we had both formally and informally. Connie knew all that. She'd been there forever, and
she had told me that she had found out that you had put it up for sale and that Star Burgers wanted to buy it.
There were all kinds of things that were talked about. The woman up the street, and there were people that had an interest in it, but what they wanted to do with it didn't match what I wanted.
Right.
And I was willing to carry a note if I felt they could run a successful business. But if someone had absolutely no experience, I wasn't going to carry a note. I'm like, you're going to kill this place in 6 months. You know what I mean? It just didn't feel right.
Right.
But yeah, it happened, I guess, fairly easily from my memory. But I was busy in a transition of getting my daughter settled in a college and moving myself. So if I have forgotten something, God forgive me, Connie, because I don't remember.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
It was a while ago, but I remember it being fairly easy. There was a lot of agreements that we signed. Actually, with Pat, he's passed away since, but he's the lawyer we sat down with and signed paperwork so that we both understood our obligations in the future.
Pat Buchanan.
Pat Buchanan, thank you, yeah.
And
he was kind of fun. He did trades for years.
And he was a lawyer.
He was the lawyer across the street.
He was like a big wheeler dealer guy, but he was really down to earth.
Yeah, and he'd come in every morning, and for some other work that he did on real estate stuff, he just had a blank slate.
He was an interesting person. He said, because I carved wood, and he was really interested in learning how to carve, and so I told him, I says, yeah, I often find wood in the forest. And he's like, oh yeah, where do you go? And I'm like, I just go walk around. And he says, but I used to live in Hawaii, and I found beautiful wood in Hawaii to carve because it's laying all over the place. So he went to Hawaii on a trip. He told me this later on. And he found a chunk of wood in it, and he brought it back in his golf bag. And they pulled it out, and they said, you can't bring this. And this is like a lawyer guy, like I said, a big wheeler dealer, rich guy. And here he is trying to sneak a piece of wood from Hawaii into Humboldt County so I can show him how to carve it. And I thought that was pretty funny. And he was a really cool guy, and I totally appreciate his realness.
Yeah, me too.
And my last question is another WH, is whatever you want to say to grand finale this whole transition of this story.
I'll share my amazement of all the owners that came after me. Because when we did have a reunion, it might have been the 25th, but anyway, it was me, Connie, and Quincy, and I'm blown away by the fact that pretty much these women...
You mean Darcy?
Darcy, yeah, really held the same values that have held the place together. It's local food, it's vegetarian. People take care of each other pretty well there. I really respect what they have done.
Mm-hmm.
The energy of the place is still really sweet. There's a lot of integrity in the food. It's about serving the community. It's not about getting rich. It never was. But just make a living in Humboldt County, treat people well, eat well, take care of each other. To me, it's a really sacred job, and I'm delighted to be part of it.
Yeah, so it was Melanie, Connie, Darcy, and now Sue.
And so,
And these were all employees of the business. That's what's amazing about it,
yeah.
is that
Yeah.
everybody worked there, so they knew somewhat of the ins and outs of the business, and they realized the potential for it and the importance of it. And that's why this film is being made, is about the importance of the Wildflower Cafe in Arcata, California, and its importance in transitional run business, kind of a cooperative in some way, and also maintaining the integrity of what it was all about in the very beginning. And that ends our little quest into the life of Melanie Patrick and her sitting on her couch in her house. And I really appreciate this. And we're going to do some interviews with the other owners. Now, there were male owners in this story too, but I'm focusing on the females because to me, that was really important, the feminine energy that was placed into the Wildflower Cafe. And there's always going to be one Wildflower Cafe, except I did have a friend that went to Vermont and there was a Wildflower Cafe there. And I think that was a pretty old place too. But there's only one Wildflower Cafe in Arcata, and it's on 16th and G Street. And the address is 1604. And I think it even has the same number, 822-0360, which I remember just like my home phone number from when I was a kid. Something I'll never forget, and I'll never forget the Wildflower Cafe. I go there a lot still. And thank you again for doing this interview. And we kept it nice and tight and 1.5 hour long. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sean.
Yep, you got it. All right. The Wildflower Cafe was established by Melanie Patrick in 1987. Before that, it was a place called the Sprouted Seed, and it's been continually run by former employees to this day, 2023. Wildflower Cafe